Say hello to the very best mounted build ever made, the Dark Knight. This character was created and thoroughly playtested on legendary difficulty and was made without any glitches or exploits. This build took a hell of a lot of work to make, so if you end up enjoying the video then please hit the like button, share the video and subscribe if you're new here. When the Dark Knight was young, he lived in a small farm with his loving family. He was happy with them, and although life wasn't easy, they got by without too many worries. That was until the day that a stranger came to their farm, asking them for food. The kind family invited the man in and shared what little they had with him, but he spat out the food that he was given. The stranger struck at the Dark Knight's mother, sending her flying across the room and smashing into the wall with a splintering sound. His father stood up and swung at the man, but he was blocked with ease. The stranger then smiled, showing fanged teeth, which he sunk into his father's neck. The Dark Knight fled out of the house as quickly as he could travel. His older brother was just behind him and shouted at him to keep on running. The two of them made it into a nearby forest before slowing their pace. The two young brothers pause for a moment to try to make sense of their situation, and suddenly it sinks in that their parents have just been murdered. As they begin to process this grave realization, they hear someone moving towards them. They start sneaking away from the sound, treading as lightly as they can to avoid being heard. For a time, they think they are beginning to evade their pursuer. But when the young Dark Knight looks over to his brother to tell him that they aren't being followed anymore, he is greeted with the sight of his brother's heart clasped in a hand that's punctured the young boy's chest. Feeling his terror renew, he sprints away from his brother as fast as his feet can carry him, not stopping even when he thinks he might be safe. After running for longer than he could imagine, he finds a small cave in which to hide, and cowers there for the rest of the night. He didn't sleep for a single moment that night, petrified that if he closed his eyes, he would see the stranger in his mind, slaughtering his family. Instead, once the sun has fully risen, he cautiously leaves the cave, and heads out of the woods and towards the closest sign of civilization. He ends up finding his way to Riften, and once there, it isn't long before he is sent to Honor Hall Orphanage, and spends several years being tormented by Grelod the Kind, before he is able to leave the cruel place and begins working as a mercenary to survive. Being a mercenary offers him an outlet to vent the anger that he feels at not having been able to do anything to save his family. He was powerless then, but he refuses to be powerless now. He will get caught up in the ambush at Darkwater Crossing, but once he is free, he will continue his work and try to stay alive in the dangerous lands of Skyrim. The two-handed skill is going to be our main damage dealer. Two-handed weapons are very strong when they hit, and the downside of being slow to swing doesn't matter so much when mounted, as you're not stuck standing still while swinging your axe. The only perks you will want to go for in this tree will be Barbarian to increase base damage, and Limbsplitter in order to deal bleed damage to anyone you strike with your axe. Archery is going to give this build ranged damage and more options during combat. Although I didn't have this raised up as high as the two-handed skill, you will still want to boost this so that you can deal a significant amount of damage with your bows and crossbows. For this tree, I recommend only putting perks into Overdraw for the increase in damage. Don't even bother with Eagle Eye. I put a perk point into it, but it didn't work from horseback, so it's not worth it. Enchanting is arguably the most important of our crafting skills. With Enchanting, we will not only want to enchant our main gear, which I will cover in the equipment section, but we will also want to build a crafting suit or two. Enchant items of clothing and jewellery with Fortify Alchemy and Fortify Smithing in order to further improve your gear and craft stronger potions. I went up the middle rank of the skill tree in order to get the extra effect perk, but the most important ones to invest in are Enchanter. You will want to get the smithing skill up to 80 in order to get Ebony Smithing. This will let you significantly increase your armor rating and base damage of your weapons. You will also want to get the Arcane Smithing perk in order to improve enchanted items. The Alchemy skill will help this build in a variety of ways. Using Fortify Potions on Smithing and Enchanting helps to improve your gear, and Fortify Two-Handed and Archery Potions make you deal more damage. Healing Potions will come in very helpful for keeping you alive in tough fights, and Poisons are a great addition to this build, letting you deal additional damage over time. And you can craft stamina poisons to deal with warriors, and magicka poisons to deal with mages. The most important perk to go for in this tree will be Alchemist, of which you will want as many ranks as you can get. Finally, we have Heavy Armour. You'll want this skill to be fairly high, but you probably won't need too many perks invested in this tree. With 1 rank in Juggernaught and 1 in Well Fitted, I was just under the armour cap, so it's more important to just have this skill raised up, so you don't have to spend too many perk points in it. If you can, make sure you focus on improving your gear before putting perks into this, as the smithing skill will help you more than this one will. When you level up, you will want to put almost all of your levels into health. The only exception to this is that you will need to raise your magicka twice in order to use the Summon Arvak spell. Other than this though, it's important to just go for health so you can tank plenty of damage. I highly recommend using the Guardian Stones to level faster in the early game and whilst power leveling skills. Otherwise though, I would suggest using the Lord Stone for the added armour rating and magic resistance. At the end of the build you probably won't need the added armour, but the magic resistance is still helpful. You can't use powers whilst mounted on a horse, so you don't need to worry much about which powers you do and don't have, but when you're on the ground, feel free to use any shouts you like, as well as Dragon Skin for if you go up against mages. The weapons for this build are an Ebony Battle Axe, enchanted with Absorb Health and Fire Damage, and an enhanced Dwarven Crossbow, also with Absorb Health and Fire Damage. A Battle Axe was chosen as it allows you to deal damage over time through the Limbsplitter perks. This build uses a lot of damage over time effects to keep dealing damage, so this is just yet another to add to the stack. The enhanced Dwarven Crossbow is here as it's the best crossbow you can get your hands on. The reason we have gone for a crossbow instead of the bow is that we can use exploding bolts, which are much easier to hit your target with from horseback. The bolts are difficult to create and cost a pretty penny, so don't waste them too often. I chose the Absorb Health and Fire Damage enchantments, as these add more to the damage over time. Absorb Health also keeps us alive and increases our survivability, and Fire Damage stacks quite nicely on top of itself, to deal a fair amount of extra damage. The Dark Knight wears a full suit of ebony armour besides the chest, which will be the Ebony Mail. The Ebony Mail deals poison damage to enemies that get too close. This poison effect isn't anything ridiculously strong and won't kill enemies on its own, but it does add another layer to the damage on your foes. In addition, even if you miss with your swing against someone, they still will start to take damage from the mail, meaning you are dealing constant damage to them and adding to the damage over time that they are taking. With the other ebony pieces, I advise enchanting them with Fortify Two-Handed and Archery primarily, then focusing on resistances, and then Fortify Heavy Armour. The main two factions for this build are the Dark Brotherhood and Dawnguard. The Dark Knight will use the Dark Brotherhood to make himself feel powerful. Taking the lives of others makes him feel strong, and it will obviously be the way we gain access to Shadowmere, one of our main mounts for this character. He will also join the Dawnguard in order to get revenge against the vampire race and avenge his family. Although not being pure of heart, or even a nice person in general, he still will find some level of belonging within the ranks of the Dawnguard, but he won't let it show in fear of being seen as weak. This build uses no normal followers for the most part, but there are two horses that you want to go for. Shadowmere is arguably the most powerful horse in the game, and he does respawn around about 10 days after being killed, but I found that he could end up being lost fairly easily, so you want to use Arvak, the conjured horse you will get from the Soul Cairn. Arvak is your versatile horse who you can summon at a moment's notice and who can even be used on the island of Solstheim. As long as the game considers you to be on the world map, you can summon him. Don't forget that as this character, you will need to sink 2 level ups into Magicka in order to be able to cast him. If you want an in-depth look at mounted combat and how to become an unstoppable force whilst on horseback, then watch the guide that I uploaded yesterday. There'll be a link for it in the description. You'll want to use mounted combat as often as you possibly can, but there will be times when you aren't able to be on horseback. In these situations, just treat the character like a two-handed warrior for the most part, but keep in mind that you also do have a crossbow. This means you can deal with archers and mages at close range, and deal with warriors from a distance, forcing them to play against a style that counters them effectively. As a quick note to add on to, I will say that all of this footage is from Legendary difficulty, and I played for on this difficulty, so it certainly is possible to do, but it is far from easy. If you do want to play on the highest difficulty though, then make sure to utilise skill trainers effectively, do quests that give you access to better equipment or abilities, definitely do the Book of Love quest in Riften for a permanent boost to your magic resistance, and if you also just want to get a bit better at gameplay in general, then I would highly recommend checking out Get Good Guy, the guy who gets good at games. He makes some great videos for a few different games, and although his tips aren't for Skyrim, I've managed to improve my skills simply by watching the great content that he keeps making and learning from the advice that he gives. He's also just a pretty cool and really nice guy. I hope that all of you enjoyed this build. It took a hell of a lot of work, but knowing that this build works so well on Legendary makes it worth the time it took. If you agree, then please leave a like. You have no idea how much I will appreciate it. If this is the first video of mine you have watched, then please subscribe and stick around. I've got tons more great Skyrim builds, as well as other videos, so take a browse and see if anything takes your fancy. There will be even more information on my character in the description, but if you have any additional questions, feel free to ask them in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you stick around for more great content.